Afternoon, I'm Rob Hart, midday anchor and host of the WBBM Noon Business Hour, and thank you for joining us for our panel discussion, AI, Friend or Foe. And I must say at the very beginning of our talk today that in the interest of full disclosure, I am a human being. And we're joined by our human panelists as we talk about the future of artificial intelligence. Some people you have heard if you are a regular listener of the Noon Business Hour. I want to say hello to Matt Wren, who is a tech expert and founder of VR AR in Chicago. And hello to Rebecca Willett, University of Chicago professor of statistics and computer science. And R.J. Hodeby, who is the head of analytical research at Placer AI in Chicago. You have no doubt heard an awful lot about artificial intelligence over the past couple of months. It seemingly came out of nowhere. However, as you will learn over the next hour, it is a discipline that has been in the works for decades. And there's a cascade of questions about the future of artificial intelligence as you see different ways it is applied in the real world, from applications like ChatGPT, where AI is answering questions and even giving you treatises. Can it be used to write a wedding toast? Can it be used to write a speech? Can it be used to plagiarize a term paper? Yes, yes, and yes. And then you're also seeing stories about how artificial intelligence generated art is being used to create some hoax images. Maybe you're no doubt familiar with the picture of Pope Francis walking around in the stylish winter coat that some people shared online a couple of weeks ago before everyone revealed it was actually not only just a piece of artificial intelligence created art, but one that was generated by a human being in Chicago who said he was tripping on mushrooms at the time. So we'll talk about all that and more, but let's begin by talking about what separates artificial intelligence, AI as we know it today, from machine learning or computers and applications that were created by human programmers with a specific set of instructions.
Yeah, so I think of machine learning as basically teaching a computer to learn from examples. So if you think about teaching a kid to know the difference between cats and dogs, you show them lots of examples in books and on the street, and you point out different features that distinguish them. And eventually the kid makes a mental model so that when they see a new animal, they can tell what it is. And what we're doing with machine learning is exactly the same. We're giving it lots of examples and helping it to learn a model so that when it gets a new image, it can distinguish whether it's a cat or a dog. I think one of the big changes that we've seen in recent years that differentiates more classical machine learning from the really powerful tools we're seeing today is the huge amount of data that we're feeding into these things and the enormous computational power that's that's behind these algorithms. A lot of the fundamental methods in mathematics are, like you said, things that have been around for decades.
Artificial intelligence is that one way, a very necessary way, of just managing, I don't even want to say the terabytes of data that we are generating on a daily basis, that it makes the amount of data that we're generating, it allows you to navigate it in a way that could take years, if not centuries, if you had to use old tech.
I mean, that's part of it. So, I want to go back to your first question a little bit about the difference between AI and ML. So machine learning, awesome explanation. With AI, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Turing test, which is the concept of you could type a prompt to a computer and you wouldn't know that it wasn't a human responding to you. So artificial intelligence is basically I'm interacting with something in the way a computer, a program, in the way that I would interact with a human. And it's going to respond to me, and I would, in theory, expect the way I would expect a human to respond. So you're dealing with the massive amounts of data that you're talking about. And as humans, we don't realize how much data we take in all day, every day. Everything we see, everything we hear, everything we smell, all of our thoughts, all of our memories. That's all, to a computer, ingesting that stuff, that's data. So when you're talking about a computer program that, like a ChatGPT, that you're now teaching to bring in all of this information and be able to process it and then be able to do certain things with it. So like ChatGPT, I'm going to ask it to write me a paper on Roosevelt. Okay, fine. It's going to go and look at all the data it's ever received and also look at writing styles and say, okay, here's a paper on Roosevelt. So, yeah, to a certain degree, it's a way of, I wouldn't say necessarily storing, but processing all of that data and making it useful. But to that point, it's still a computer program. It's still going to basically do what we train it to do.
Yeah, I'd say just on top of that, I mean, The machine learning part is the teaching. That's the part. Then we get to AI, which is the processing the data and starting to actually apply it to different things. And we're at a point now where we're starting to see real changes in the way people interact with hardware that's making it more interesting. Now, the big data was, I think, the most practical stuff, but now we're starting to see at-home, assistants and things like that, where you can actually start to apply it in different ways than maybe just a computer screen. That's real, starting to bring it into real life. Now, some of it's, still science fiction. Still, some of this is going to take a long time to really process, but the amount of data that can be processed and then applied in different ways that consumers are interacting with household devices, pretty exciting stuff, and it's going to really transform our lives, I think.
When it comes to the popular perception of artificial intelligence, are we at an inflection point of the technology, or are we at an inflection point of marketing? You're hearing about it more and more because we're talking about it more and more, but it's been around for quite some time.
I think we're at an inflection point of the technology. When ChatGPT was released, it surprised a lot of experts in the field with just how powerful it was. Now, that's not to say that it can do everything. We do have a long way to go, just like RJ mentioned. And there's a lot of shortcomings associated with it. But nevertheless, this was really a giant leap forward. And similarly, in the sciences, we saw AlphaFold 2 being able to predict the structure of proteins way beyond what scientists had been able to do previously. And that, again, was a major inflection point and a major change. And so I don't know that we're at like the Terminator stage of AI. I think there are other things to maybe be concerned about. But nevertheless, I think the last few years have seen some real major advances that are not just hype.
And we will discuss the Terminator aspect of AI because I do feel, though, that there are decades of science fiction that has tried to tackle what is artificial intelligence and is it superior to a human being. I feel like there were probably decades of Star Trek episodes devoted to the human quality, and that is the one thing that is missing from artificial intelligence. And we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes, but let's begin by talking about some of the ways in which AI is being used today. You work at a place called Placer AI.
Yeah.
And you use artificial intelligence to track trends in the restaurant space and in retail. So how does that business work, and how does where does the AI component of Placer AI come in?
Sure, it's a great question. So we are a location-based analytics company powered by mobile data. Effectively, we partner with several hundred apps that allows us to get data on a device, but we don't collect any personal and identifiable information from that device. We just know where the location, where that device is gone, where it goes to, and then we assign a unique ID to get things like visit frequency, so retailers and restaurants can figure out more accurately their trade area and things like that. We right now have a panel size of about 25 million devices that we get data from. That represents about 8% of the population, give or take. But from that panel size, then we're able to use AI to collect that data based on other factors in that, that region, whether it be demographics, whether it be household income, things like that. Then we can then apply and then get a full estimate for that property, for that chain, for that city, that intersection, that plot of land, any physical property. That's how we're using the data, using that sample size, teaching it through machine learning, and then applying it through artificial intelligence to come up with estimates for foot traffic for any physical property.
The sheer amount of data that you get from, what is it, 20 million?
25 million.
25 million mobile phones, 8% of the population. If you did not have artificial intelligence, how long would it take to sift through all that data?
Oh, I don't even want to make a guess at that one. We'd, probably centuries from now, to be honest. And, to the question earlier, I mean, this is stuff where I think that inflection point, the ability to actually, see and apply the data in different ways into, giving actual insights is there too. But I also think the marketing inflection to your question is also starting to really become a thing, because a lot of companies like mine are starting to figure out a way to monetize this a bit more too. So with that comes the monetization aspect of it all too. But at the end of the day too, it comes down to have a good product that actually works. And thankfully, when we do our data test, our data comes in about 95% accurate with the retailer or restaurants, people counters as it is. So I feel like we've got a good way we're using it, and that inflection point, both marketing and product, are really starting to become in full effect.
And then Matt, when I was in college, one of the elective courses you would take is computer programming, and it became very obvious early on that it's a lot of work to make even a basic computer program work. And this is 1999. So you're still doing if-then statements and just every
For loops. Yep.
every single possible thing. I mean, to the uninitiated, this just looks like a miracle. It shows up and it gives you all the information you need, but there's a lot of human hours that went into making a computer program work. From a coding perspective, from making software better to making better hardware, where does AI come in and how does that improve your job?
Okay, so basically I'm an edge technology programmer. I've been programming technology that's kind of on the front edge of, augmented reality, virtual reality, data analytics, all that sort of stuff for a lot of years. I've used ChatGPT. Actually, I was prompted to do this just recently. A friend of mine who's another programmer, and he said, tell it to program some functions. So I'm like, okay, fine, I know how to program. So I wrote several functions. I used Python initially. I actually did a little bit in C# as well. And I said, okay, and then I went to ChatGPT and I told it to program and see how it would come back to me. And I would say about 7 out of 10 of them were, I tell it, write a function that'll do this, it did that. And about 3 out of 10, or 2 to 3 out of 10, it came back and what it gave me was complete garbage. And like, not even something that I would say was a starting point to what I'd asked it to do. So I will say it's definitely good in terms of like, it can understand what you're asking it to do. It can return usable code a lot of the time. I wouldn't say it could replace a programmer today. And ultimately, the other important factor is you still need a programmer to be able to tell it what you want. There's got to be a programmer that actually can understand what you want the program to do. So, from a time-saving perspective, if you're a programmer, I think it's really useful. From I saw an article the other day of will ChatGPT replace programmers? No. It won't, not in the near term, because you still need somebody who actually understands the technology to be able to tell it what you want from it and say it in a way that you can actually understand code and logic and data and how to analyze all those things. There's still bits and bytes that have to be put together the right way. I think it's really functional. I think it's a really cool tool. I don't think we're quite at an inflection point of it's going to start replacing people. It could potentially replace somebody really low level who would normally be like an assistant to a senior programmer, or a senior programmer who's assigning some, write this function, write that function out to other folks. Because they could at least then analyze the code and say, yeah, this is good, this is not good, just like you would if you were working with a junior programmer.
And then Rebecca, when it comes to artificial intelligence learning from its mistakes, we talked about some of the ways it can work. We talked about some of the ways in which it comically swings and misses. But the learning curve, how steep is that? And can it learn from its mistakes, and all of the misfires we're talking about today, will they be improved upon a year from now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's really context dependent. So with some things, it's a matter of scale. So for instance, the difference between what GPT-3 can do and what GPT-4 can do is quite large. And there wasn't a fundamental change in the technology, but rather they were using more data and larger networks on bigger machines and using more hardware. And because of that, you're going to be able to improve the hit rate when you use tools like Copilot to assist a software developer. But that said, that's an example of a setting where there is just tons of examples out there that we can learn from. There's other settings, like in the sciences, where we have much more limited data, and just scaling up isn't going to be sufficient. So we might want to use AI, for instance, to accelerate climate simulations so that we can make more accurate predictions about the effects of climate change. Well, in that setting, we don't have a whole lot of data that we can learn from about the kind of climate that we might expect in 50 or 100 years. So in those settings, we have to use past data about climate in a different world, in addition to physical models and information about atmospheric sciences, in order to train a machine to help us make fast and accurate forecasts. And so, whether, what things are going to be easy to solve or hard to solve, it's really going to be very context dependent.
Before we go into the discussion of AI and the employment market, it seems we are also in an inflection point of marketing, that all of a sudden, not only is everybody using ChatGPT more or less as a parlor trick just to have fun with it, but there is also a lot of proposals as to what you can do with it, and some of it may be hokum, Some is just a way to get your name out there. But let's go back a couple of years. IBM and Watson. And that was an artificial intelligence program, and and memorably, Watson was a contestant on Jeopardy, and it won. And so, where is Watson in the evolution of artificial intelligence? And will we see more gimmicks like having an artificial intelligence app competing on a game show?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly we'll see a lot more gimmicks like that. And it is exciting, right, to see these things have capabilities that we just didn't imagine a computer could have years ago. And I think Watson helped develop a lot of the core technologies that are being used today, but it was fundamentally different. It wasn't as free form as the kinds of things that ChatGPT can do. And so there's just no question that ChatGPT is miles ahead of where Watson was. It's, standing on the shoulders of giants, but nevertheless extremely impressive. Yeah, I don't know if you guys
No,
want to add
I
anything
was going
to
to say,
that.
we're already starting to see instances. In the restaurant space, almost any function within the restaurant space has some sort of technology solution. Some aren't AI, some aren't machine learning, but one area we're seeing is order taking. That's something that frees up capacity for people to do other jobs, and we're starting to see, drive-through orders, which, using machine learning and AI eventually to take those orders. And one of the gimmicks is now celebrity voices with that. So we're already starting to see that evidence that people are going to use this to try to build acceptance of that. And obviously there's a lot of companies, a lot of capital invested in this space right now too. So they're going to look for people to buy in this acceptance. So I think we're going to see a lot more gimmicks behind this too. And it's going to be tough too out there delineating what's really produced by a human and what's not. But sometimes that's okay too. In that case, some of these things that make it more productive and take care of the mundane tasks in our day-to-day life, I think that's okay.
I think that's a good jumping off point, is how artificial intelligence can be applied in an everyday setting without getting too apocalyptic, because every technological change, there has been some disruption, but people have found other things to do. There's still a certain level of prosperity, and a lot of people still go to work every day. They're just going to work differently compared to 20 years ago or 40 years ago or 60 years ago, and technological change definitely ushered through that evolution. When it comes to making jobs easier or making people more productive, you talked about AI in the restaurant space. What are some examples of AI being used to make, let's say, a franchise fast food establishment that much more productive?
Yeah, I think it starts kind of from top down. In terms of where to put that next location. So our data can take a look at where have your most successful restaurants been, and analyze what the demographics behind that. Are there other factors? What's the competitive makeup of that particular location? And then go find other areas in the U.S. and say, all right, this has got the same profile as that. You may want to take a look at that. We'll also factor in things like development. All right, maybe a lot of other restaurant chains have figured out this particular site is particularly attractive. Well, we can balance that out. Look at other things like that. So I think from a strategy perspective, it does that. But then down even to the operational part of it too. The things, the more mundane tasks that people don't want to do. Order taking can be a frustrating thing. Obviously there's a lot of sometimes language barrier that goes along with that, sometimes trial and error, maybe new products being released, and that's tough to get the crew to fully understand that. And so just being able to take care of some of those tasks too that is there. And I think beyond that too, just being able to analyze and digest a lot amount of data, which both people have mentioned here. That's a big part of it too, just being able to take and understand and ultimately hopefully serve your customer better in that case too. So I think there's a lot of practical examples of day-to-day in the restaurant space or retail space that we're seeing it across the board, from site selection, strategy, operations. A lot of ways we're already starting to see transformation. Now, are we going to have complete automation in restaurants? Probably not. We still need people to program and do all this stuff, but we're making some pretty big strides the last couple of years.
And then we talk about restaurants, but your company also works in the retail side of things as well.
Yeah.
And could this be disruptive in the brick and mortar retail space, or could this potentially be a lifeline in a space that's kind of taken its lumps over the last couple of years?
I see it as the latter. I think that absolutely physical retail, there's been a lot of discussion that physical retail is dead, but I think ultimately what it comes down to is just boring physical retail is dead. It's just a case where if you've got a good experience and can integrate AI in the right way, you can make the customer in-store experience a lot better. We're already starting to see it, with some of the virtual trying rooms, and then they use various elements of AI with that. But we're starting to see that applied in ways that make the experience more enjoyable. The kind of omni-channel retail, the idea that you can go into a store, you may not have that specific product, but they can still get that to you by the next day. Being able to manage inventory systems, that's been one of the big challenges in the retail space, is managing online versus in-store inventory platforms. And so the AI can certainly help out on that front as well. So I think there's a lot of ways that can improve the overall experience and ultimately make the experience a lot better. But I think it can also help the online experience too. So the whole, however consumers want to do it, buy products and purchase products, I think there's a solution in AI for each one of those channels.
And Matt Ryan, you were our resident Metaverse guy on the Noon Business Hour, and there's the prevailing conventional wisdom is that the Metaverse is dead. AI killed it, and now AI is the future. And I'll give you an example from last night, though. I have 3 young daughters at home. They got new sunglasses. Thanks, Mom and Dad. But they got new sunglasses, and they managed to try them on using a Snapchat-style app, where they would pull the different styles of sunglasses from the virtual shelf, and then they would take a picture with their phone and see it on their face. And is this kind of a merging, a meld, if you will, of the metaverse and AI, or has that always been there?
They've been tied together more than you think for a long time. So follow me down a rabbit hole a little bit here, because I program augmented reality, and I actually would go down into libraries of how it actually works on device. So if you go dig deep enough, you'll run into this program, which has been around for a while, called OpenCV, Open Computer Vision, which is basically teaching devices to understand what it's seeing from a camera. Basically, you got the device has the camera, it's processing the images, okay? That's AI. It's machine learning and AI that's basically then you're going down to that level, and you're using AI to basically write computer algorithms that say, okay, recognize this object, and when you see that object for augmented reality, play something against it, so it knows how to recognize facial features. So all of that AR technology was essentially kind of trained using machine learning and AI. Now you come back up to the point where you're actually using it, and you want to say you want to talk about in the metaverse. There's the concept of virtual humans, which a virtual human basically is an AI avatar that is taught to interact like a human would. And it's got a voice processor, and it's possibly got power behind it running like ChatGPT, so that when you speak to it, it's using, again, AI to analyze your voice, turn that into words, use those words to put a prompt into a system that AI is then recognizing what you asked it, producing a response, turning that right back to another voice synthesizer, which was again written using AI, and speak it right back to you. So the AI and AR and VR and all that stuff, they're all very closely tied together. I would say the metaverse, first of all, I hate the word metaverse. I'll be one of the ones to say that. As somebody who's been working in AR and VR for a long time, I can't stand that word, because it's been around forever. And it's more than it's not one thing. It's like the internet. It's not one device or one network. It's a lot of different things that are all going to collaborate together. AI is a part of it. AI is being used to develop it, and AI will also be used heavily within it, and it's what you're going to interact with. So yeah, they're very closely tied together, and I will say it's absolutely not dead. It's just in a different point on the Gartner hype cycle than AI is.
I mean, I feel like there's I don't want to use the word metaverse,
That's okay.
Web3,
Web3 I like.
There have been different elements of that just floating in the ether, going back to Second Life 20 years ago, or The Sims, and then clearly we're all on social media, and the version of ourselves that we present to Facebook or to Twitter or to Snapchat or Instagram, or name the application, is clearly an online version of yourself.
Right.
And so it's all out there. You're kind of going in different places, but it's all kind of leading into the same destination.
I really like the term Web3. Despite the fact that, whatever, it's a good term, because ultimately when you think of it not as this metaverse, this place that you're going to go to, like Ready Player One or Snow Crash or any of those things, you think of it like Web3 of, okay, this is just another form of the internet. Like I'm here physically. You and I have obviously talked on the phone, on the radio, but of course I'm listening to it over the internet. So like all of this stuff is interconnected. It's not like they are separated. They're all put together. And there's a lot of technologies that come together to make it work. There's definitely AI. There's definitely AR and VR. Blockchain is another huge one that's actually starting, when you're tokenizing digital assets, things like that. All of these technologies are going to ultimately converge and be used together, and they are already doing that today. I think it'll accelerate and be, much easier to work with them and a lot less separation in the future. But Web3, the reason I like that term is because, yes, when I'm interacting in, a virtual space, I'm almost by definition doing it on the internet, and therefore there's data layers there involved. Of is it a web page? Is it an actual web browser based virtual space, or is it a programmatic virtual space that's running on my computer and communicating over the internet? Both exist today. There's Frame VR, which is just web based. There's Verbella, which is application based. They're both virtual spaces, and I can experience both of them either flat on my phone, on a computer, in a VR headset. They work across them. In the near future, you'll be able to put on glasses that are AR glasses and be having a virtual conversation with someone else physically there too. The technology, it's just going to take time for some of the hardware and the technology to evolve, but ultimately most of that does, to a certain degree, exist today, and it has for a long time.
Rebecca, 28 years ago actually now, at the unveiling of Windows 95, the Rolling Stones are playing, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer are dancing like nobody's watching in ill-fitting khaki pants. And there's just a great deal of hype about a new product rollout. And it's very interesting today to see the tech sector look at AI, a place in which they're all trying to plant their flag and make money, and say, society is not ready for this. Is this the first time that there has been a new product rollout by the technology industry that also comes with a dire warning?
No, it's certainly not the first time. There have been many, many cases like this in history. And I think, just like when we think about the promise of AI having, some real meat behind it and some hype, I think some of the dire predictions have, some real legitimate concerns behind them, and also some hyperbole. But as we're talking about applications, I just want to talk about some other things that might be less visible to consumers, but where AI is making a real impact. So for instance, one area is in drug discovery. People are using AI to help find new drugs and pharmaceuticals faster and more affordably than previously. And as we all know, the whole drug development process is extremely expensive, and so rare diseases or diseases that are primarily affecting underserved communities are much less likely to get affordable pharmaceuticals. And the hope is that with these AI tools, that's going to become possible. Or, another area where, we think about, just dealing with vast quantities of data. You could imagine saying, I want to design a microbial community that's going to break down plastics and help us with a variety of different environmental concerns. And we try out a few, and they work for maybe a day, and then all the microbes just die out. It's not sustainable. So I want to figure out, as a scientist, well, what's the right sort of mixture of microbes that's going to break down plastics, not go out of control, but also be going to live more than a day. There's maybe billions or trillions of different combinations I could try. I can't possibly experiment on all of them. But what I can do is I can use AI to build a model that helps me understand what kinds of ingredients are likely to make a community more effective than others. And so these things aren't really visible to us day to day, but I think they're really going to have a profound effect on society. And so I think, we are going to have AI affecting all of our lives in ways that are, visible, like augmented reality in retail and restaurants, and also ways that are invisible.
Now let's talk about some of the ethical considerations of artificial intelligence. Last week on the Noon Business Hour, there was a segment about people using ChatGPT to write wedding toasts. Now, I've written a couple in my time, and I enjoy doing them. But it seems like, and they always write themselves. You refer to the groom as your partner in crime and just kind of go on from there. But as someone who is a writer at heart, I enjoy the creative process. A lot of other people that's terrifying to them. The prospect of public speaking, writing something to be delivered in public, is one of their biggest fears. And they turn to AI. Where does the ethical component come in where you say, what I'm doing right now, this is the product of artificial intelligence and not my own work?
Yeah, that's a tough question, and academia certainly is trying to grapple with this as we think about what constitutes plagiarism among our students and what doesn't. I think that when you're thinking about writing a wedding toast and you want to use this as a tool to help spur your creativity or help you fine-tune a turn of phrase, then that's totally fine. If you're handing in graded work or you're claiming something that is your own original work, then I think you need to ask your instructor what the expectations and guidelines are. Instructors are going to have to change the way that they write prompts for students, and publishing houses are going to have to rethink what their standards are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that there's been a lot of discussion about ChatGPT, but there's been, at least to my knowledge, no articles that have cited ChatGPT yet. No one wants to be the first person to reveal that I didn't really write this thing. So it's really interesting, and that whole gray area with attribution right now is a thing that a lot of people are struggling with. And I agree. I mean, I have a team of analysts, and I've told them, hey, if this is something that helps you structure your argument or your research a little bit better, yeah, let's do that. But we cannot just turn that in right now. It's just something that, and normally, we need to refine it anyways. It's not perfectly ready for publication as it is, but that's going to be interesting to see how that evolves, the attribution and how it gets, effectively the regulation behind it, because I do think it is a gray area right now and it needs to be sorted out. So.
See, now I remember a couple of years ago, actually, I want to say about 2 years ago, I remember reading a blog post. It was on one of the VR news sites. I don't remember which one, but you read the whole thing and I was like, okay, a decent article. And at the end it said, FYI, this entire article was written by AI. Now this was pre-ChatGPT, so I'm not sure what wrote it.
Yeah.
But it was an entire article, read like a good article, and it was written, it tagged itself, written 100% by AI.
Yeah.
So there's people who are doing it, when you get to the ethical consideration though of how, at what point are you responsible for telling people? Because I remember seeing the thing on 60 Minutes, like I'm sure a lot of people did, of, he gave the tag at the end, which was for the first time, this was 100% human content. Of, because now we're getting to the point where you have to start thinking about that. Do people need to say, hey, 50% of this article was written by AI? And I guess where is that line going to be drawn? I'm not the right person to answer that question, I'll be honest.
And even
but it's something to consider.
That goes back into history, because on TV news broadcasts in the 50s and into the 80s, you would have an announcer saying at the very end, portions of this program are mechanically reproduced, that it was not 100% live. It was on film or videotape. There was a minicam unit out in the field producing content and bringing it back to the station. So there is some prologue there. On the ethical side of things, sooner or later, an AI program is going to develop sentience. And what happens in the term, to reference the movie Short Circuit, what happens if number 5 is in fact alive? and you do have an AI program that refuses to follow your commands or decides that it's doing things on its own. There is in that movie, what happens if it refuses to turn itself off? And that's a philosophical and a technological area we may hit before too long.
Honestly, I think I've got some real ethical concerns about the state of AI, but they don't really involve sentience at this point. I think that's pretty far off. I think things that are really happening in the world today include things like authoritarian regimes using AI-based tools for mass surveillance of populations in order to control populations. I think AI tools that are used by social media to maximize user engagement can promote things that are, for instance, really unhealthy for young girls to be watching, or have even been used to promote, genocide in some countries, all in the name of profit. And I think, things like deep fakes are a real concern. I think that these AI tools are going to be very useful for spreading misinformation and influencing elections. And so I have some very deep concerns about the enormous capabilities of AI, but almost all of them relate to bad human actors misusing extremely powerful tools, and much less about sentient AIs at this point.
I was going to say, I want to add to that a little bit too. One of the biggest ones, so I've done in my time working as an engineer, software and technology, I've done penetration testing, cybersecurity work, and social engineering is an insanely powerful tool. It's almost frightening how easy it is sometimes to convince people of things and essentially get access to passwords or networks or locations that you shouldn't have access to. You throw AI into that mix and teach AI how to do some of that, it becomes a very, very powerful tool that is very easy for someone who is frankly not that skilled to wield. And so yeah, is there an ethical consideration there? There's a huge one, because now you're giving a really powerful key, essentially a master key to a whole lot of locks to somebody who really might not have the ethical background to use it the right way. So, aside from, absolutely major concerns, again, on the ethical front of people using the technology to influence the masses the wrong way. We all know how social media to a certain degree was blamed related to recent elections. And so, okay, when you think about, okay, well, if AI was actually maximizing that use case, then it's really going to be influencing elections. So yes, from penetration testing, social engineering, security, things like that, it's a big threat. I'm not really scared about sentience yet. I think that's farther away than a lot of people think. General artificial intelligence, generalized artificial intelligence, AI that does more than one thing that it was trained to do, where it's training itself to do all sorts of things. I think we're a little bit farther off from that. At least I hope we're farther off from that. I'm sure there might be stuff happening behind the scenes that I don't know about. But I'm not worried about sentience yet. At the end of the day, computers will generally do what you ask them to do. So it's not that big of a fear at this point. But yeah, people misusing it, absolutely, that's a concern.
Yeah, I think, for instance, with ChatGPT, which is extremely impressive, what it's basically doing is it's saying, given a sequence of words, what's the most likely next word? So if I say, hello, my name is Indigo Montoya, you would probably guess that the next word is going to be... Yes, you killed my father. Yeah, exactly. Right, so you can make a very accurate prediction based on some training data. But it doesn't mean that you really understand, what the context is, what the meaning is, or anything like that. It's just making really good predictions based on probabilities. And that's a very far cry from sentience.
Well, if you create a movie quotes bot, then I'm out of business, quite frankly. I have nothing to talk about. You mentioned something very interesting about how some fast food restaurants are using celebrity voices or are contemplating using celebrity voices as an order taker. And now you get into an interesting legal area. Yeah. And that is, what happens if we have a chain fast food restaurant and they can take your chicken tenders order in the style of Sean Connery. Does the estate of Sean Connery come after you?
They'll have ChatGPT write up a legal brief on it and figure it all out. But it does. That's another ethical area that certainly I think is going to be addressed. Where are the boundaries when you can do these type of things? It's still very much the Wild West when it comes to this stuff. So I think that's going to be an interesting development over the years. Following up on the conversation just a minute ago, too, the other interesting thing that we've been thinking about is that, if you look at productivity among workers, there's demands to try doing more and more and more. And having some of these tools now, does that tempt people to, hey, I've got to get this done, I've got to get this done. Can you play catch up on this? Using some of these AI shortcuts and things like that. That I think is also going to be very interesting to watch. What kind of behavioral changes, because just in the workplace that happens. The threat of being replaced by a robot worker, and you're seeing that in the fast food industry all the time. And to be honest, that's the number one pressure if you talk to any restaurant operator. That's the biggest area that the big cost headache. But you obviously need to have workers. If you can get away with more and more of this stuff, what do people use these things for? Does this create more nefarious type activity? I don't think we're there necessarily quite yet, at least in the restaurant space, but it is going to be interesting to see how that develops and how that changes behavior as people try to keep up in terms of productivity.
I'm going to give the last word to artificial intelligence. We do have a list of questions generated by ChatGPT. And for all three, I'm going to end with, how do you see AI evolving over the next decade? And what new opportunities or challenges do you anticipate around ethical and societal impacts? We talked about some of that just now, but where is AI in 10 years from now, 2033?
Wow, 10 years. So I'm going to start with one of the things that I've heard people talk about specifically with regards to immersive technology, but it would apply just as well to AR, which is that you can do a lot less in 1 year than you think and a lot more in 10 than you think. And so I think where will it be in 10 years? I think we will generally be I think on an individual level, we will be interacting with AI on a regular basis, daily basis, almost all day, every day. You'll effectively, do you guys remember there was a TV commercial when Siri came out with Martin Scorsese basically talking to Siri as his personal assistant in a cab. Do you guys remember that?
Yes, yeah.
I think that will be a much more realistic reality 10 years from now with how we interact with AI. You'll have your own personal assistant that is attuned to your behaviors, your actions, all of that. I think it'll be there. In terms of the ethical considerations, I really hope again, I'm going to draw back a little bit to my immersive technology experience here and say, when you're dealing with immersive technology, privacy is a huge concern because you have access to camera feeds that are always on and always recognizing your space. So you start to think of things like that. The developers, myself included, who were working in that space, unlike kind of in the early 90s when the web was forming, we weren't thinking about privacy back then. We were thinking, what can you use this for? Immersive technology, we started thinking about privacy, security. All of those were a forethought. And so you're developing it with that in your consciousness. Same thing with AI, I hope will happen. People are developing it, thinking about how are people going to misuse this? How can we protect against that? How are people, what is this going to affect in terms of privacy? How can we protect against that? What's it going to do in terms of security? How do we protect against that? I hope the developers, as they're building new tools, take that into consideration from the start. I know with almost anything I program nowadays, those are the things that you think about. Which I will say, sure enough, 20, 30 years ago, that's not what we were thinking about. 20, 30 years ago, it was how do I make this work? Now, anything I'm going to release, that's a forethought. What was the second part of the question? I'm sorry. So it's like ethically, where is it going to go, and ultimately, where do I think it'll be?
And where do you see it going over the next decade?
I mean, like I said, I think it'll be a much more common tool. ChatGPT, at the end of the day, I don't think it does much more than most of the people who work in the technology knew was capable. I think it made a lot more people aware of what's capable, is pretty much what it did. But those types of functions have been around. It's not new. GPT-4 is obviously much more powerful than GPT-3. And I think you'll see evolutions like that of it'll become much more prevalent. It'll become much easier to work with. It's definitely going to be fed with a lot more data, and there's going to be a lot more uses for it over the next 10 years. And I think, it'll be something that we interact with on a daily basis.
Rebecca, AI in 10 years.
Yeah. So let me start with a quick story. When I was in grad school, I went to the hospital to work with a collaborator. And they had this sign in the elevator, and it said, if you sign up for our brain study, we'll give you a CD with all your brain data. So of course I signed up for this. And it was a lot of fun.
The first CD, though, was 5 cents. And then you had to sign up for it.
That's right. Yes, it was that long ago. But they called me a couple weeks later, and they're like, actually, you need to go get a clinical scan, because we found a big tumor when we looked at your data.
Oh, wow.
And so I did, and they found the tumor, they removed it, there's a functioning neural network in there somewhere, and everything turned out good. But I think, when I think about this process, every single element of that is going to be changed by AI. The way neuroscientists design their experiments, the way that we collect that imaging data, the way that the computers take that data and make an image that a radiologist can view, the way that the radiologist interacts with that image and tries to determine where there's tumors or lesions, the way surgeons assess the risk of surgery and whether it's the right call or not, and the way that they do surgery using robotics and assistive devices, and what kinds of therapeutics and pharmaceuticals are prescribed afterwards. I mean, it's just going to transform every single aspect of that process. And those are the kinds of changes that I think we can expect in the next 10 years. In addition to that, just real quick, when we talk about GPT, one of the kind of dirty little secrets is that in order to train ChatGPT, estimates are that it costs about $5 million, took 500 billion words to train, and basically used 500 metric tons of CO2, the equivalent of like 600 plane trips from London to New York. Just a huge environmental carbon cost associated with training these systems. And so one of the frontiers is, I think, also going to be taking these tools and making them way more efficient so that we can use them without destroying the earth in the process.
So we've had the technology response, the academia response. I think the consumer response is going to be the most interesting. And Matt made a good point about, ChatGPT has been around, but this is the first time consumers have really seen it. and maybe that makes consumers more accepting. The other point you made is that hardware really hasn't caught up to the AI part of that too. 10 years, that's going to be the case, and that's some of the things, the Jetsons type things that we started to see may start to come into reality. I still think it's going to take longer to get there, but as hardware does start to catch up and consumers become more accepting, then all of a sudden adoption becomes very interesting. In what different things outside of just computer programs and things like that, what happens in the real world and some of the more sci-fi things that we do happen. In 10 years, I mean, that's a reality. Like everything, it probably starts on the marketing front, having things being advertised to you in different stores like that. But it's going to be interesting to see the other things just to make our everyday lives maybe more efficient, maybe more enjoyable. Those are kind of things that I think, with hardware and stuff like that, AI is the backbone for, machine learning AI backbone for. It'll be very interesting to see what happens there. But I think you're right. Daily interaction with AI, 10 years. I think that's a very accurate prediction.
RJ Hodavi, Head of Analytical Research at Placer AI in Chicago. Rebecca Willett, University of Chicago Professor of Statistics and Computer Science. And Matt Wren, Tech Expert and founder of VR/AR in Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us today and for this discussion that easily we could be here for 6 or 7 hours. By the way, how much time do you have? Thank you for joining us today for this live stream and this live discussion. I hope you found it nearly as enlightening as I did. And of course, tomorrow afternoon at 12:03, be sure to listen to the WBBM Noon Business Hour, where we, of course, we tackle these topics, the ethical component, the employment component, the retail component, the restaurant component. This is something that will impact all areas of our lives going forward. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Rob Hart, News Radio 105.9 WBBM.